In the spring of 1949, the People's Liberation Army Navy was founded with a collection of defected nationalist gunboats and fishing junks fitted with mountain guns. There was no destroyer, no cruiser, no aircraft carrier. There was barely a navy at all. 76 years later, that same navy operates more commissioned warships than any other country on Earth, fields 3 aircraft carriers with a 4th nuclear-powered supercarrier already under construction, and has surpassed the United States Navy in total hull count. A fact so quietly extraordinary that most people still have not registered it. This is the story of how China built its surface fleet from nothing. Not a polished institutional history, but the actual account of the dead ends, the stolen technology, the embargo workarounds, and the moment the math finally flipped. 14 warship classes, 7 decades, and a transformation that is still accelerating. Let's go. Chapter 1. The Copy and the Catastrophe, the Luda and the Luhu. The story of every Chinese warship begins in failure. In 1960, the People's Liberation Army Navy started designing its first indigenous destroyer, drawing directly from Soviet Sovremenny and Kotlin-class blueprints that Moscow had provided before relations collapsed. Then the Sino-Soviet split happened. The advisors left, and the program stopped before a single keel was laid. China had the ambition. It did not yet have the knowledge to execute it alone. Work resumed in 1965, in the middle of a country beginning to tear itself apart. The Cultural Revolution was starting. Engineers would soon be persecuted, programs shuttered, institutional knowledge systematically destroyed. Construction on China's first destroyer finally began in 1968 at Dalian and Jiangnan shipyards, and the result entered planned service in 1971. This was the Type 051, NATO designation Luda class. The Type 051 was armed with Soviet-derived HY-1 Silkworm anti-ship missiles and twin 130mm gun mounts, a design philosophy pulled directly from 1950s Soviet doctrine with nothing updated. Its steam propulsion system generated so much noise and vibration that the hull-mounted sonar was essentially useless at any speed above a crawl. An anti-submarine warfare ship that could not effectively hunt submarines. It also had no meaningful air defense capability beyond short-range guns, which meant it could not protect itself in contested airspace without land-based air cover. And yet 17 Luda-class hulls were built across multiple variants through the late 1980s. China had no alternative. The Luda was the only destroyer it could build, so it built 17 of them and kept them in service until it had something better. The last 2 were decommissioned on September 3, 2020. 12 surviving ships have since been preserved as museum vessels across Chinese ports. A ship class that began during the Cultural Revolution outlasted the Soviet Union by nearly 30 years. The final 2 Luda ships, Zhangjiang and Zhuhai, were not just retired, they were experiments. In the 1980s, during China's brief window of Western cooperation, both ships were fitted with French electronics and used as technology testbeds. Those systems were later reverse-engineered and their lessons carried forward into the next program. Nothing in Chinese naval development was ever wasted. That next program was the Type 052 NATO designation Luhu class, and it was supposed to be a genuine leap forward. Conceived in the late 1980s when China could still buy American engines and French radar systems, the 2 Luhu destroyers, Harbin and Qingdao, were the first Chinese warships powered by gas turbines. 2 American General Electric LM-2500 engines per ship, the same power plant used in U.S. Navy frigates, French Thomson CSF electronics, Italian sonar derived from Raytheon systems, French Crotalo HQ-7 short-range surface-to-air missiles, a ship assembled from the best Western components China could acquire. Then, in June 1989, Tiananmen happened. The Western arms embargo froze the supply of those components mid-production. The class was planned for 6 hulls. 4 were cancelled. The 2 that were completed entered service with crews operating systems labeled in English, French, and Italian. The manuals were in languages the sailors did not speak. Foreign technicians had to be flown in during the 2002 circumnavigation cruise to repair Qingdao's diesel engines at sea. The Luhu was China's most advanced destroyer and also an embarrassing admission of how far it still had to go. Harbin was commissioned in July 1994. Qingdao followed in March 1996. Both ships were retired without replacement in the same class. The Tiananmen embargo had killed not just the program, but the entire Western technology path. China had to find a different route. Chapter 2. Buying time with Russian steel, the dead ends and the sunburn. With Western technology cut off and no competitive domestic alternative ready, China built the Type 051B, NATO designation Luhai class, as a single experimental hull. CNS Shenzhen, commissioned in 1998, was the largest surface combatant China had ever constructed at that point, displacing over 6,000 tons. It was powered by Ukrainian gas turbines acquired after the Soviet collapse, because the American option was gone and China still could not produce a competitive marine engine of its own. The design was based on an enlarged Luhu hull. It had better habitability, better structural stability, and one feature the Luhu lacked, a built-in helicopter hangar large enough for 2 ASW helicopters, which gave it genuinely improved anti-submarine capability. The plan studied Shenzhen carefully and decided it was not good enough. Production stopped at 1 hull. CNS Shenzhen spent the rest of its career as a trials platform for systems China intended to put on future, better ships. A destroyer built not to fight, but to teach. It was upgraded in later years with VLS cells and a phased array radar that gave it capabilities comparable to the Type 054A frigate, extending its useful life by a decade. But it remained, fundamentally, a dead end. 2 years later came the Type 051C NATO designation Luzhu class. 2 hulls, Shenyang and Shijiazhuang, commissioned in October 2006 and March 2007. The Luzhou took the same Luhai hull and installed Russian S-300FM surface-to-air missiles with their Tombstone phased array radar. Range out to 150 kilometers, more than doubling anything previously in planned service. For the first time, a Chinese-built ship could engage aircraft and incoming missiles at real distances. Area air defense, finally. But the propulsion was still Soviet-era steam turbines. The hull had no meaningful radar cross-section reduction, and every critical system, the missiles, the radar, the fire control, was Russian. China had bought a capability it still could not build. Both the Luhai and the Luzhou were acknowledged dead ends. Short production runs that existed specifically to fill gaps while Chinese industry caught up. But between those 2 experiments, China made a different kind of purchase, one that sent a very specific message to the United States Navy. In 1996, China signed a contract with Russia for 2 Sovremenny-class destroyers. The price was approximately $800 million, the most expensive single-surface ship purchase in plan history. The first 2 ships, Hangzhou and Fuzhou, arrived in 1999 and 2000. 2 more, Taizhou and Ningbo, followed in 2005 and 2006. The Sovremenny was a Soviet-era ship designed with one purpose in mind: killing American aircraft carriers. Its primary weapon was the SS-N-22 Sunburn missile, traveling at Mach 2.5 at sea-skimming altitude, 120-kilometer range, with a terminal phase maneuvering capability that made interception extremely difficult. At the time of delivery, no U.S. Navy vessel had a confirmed intercept solution against it. The Sunburn was not a general-purpose weapon. It was engineered specifically to defeat American carrier battle group defenses. China now had 4 ships carrying that missile. The strategic signal was unmistakable, and the acquisition told the world something else. China could not yet build what it needed to threaten American carriers, so it paid Russia to provide it. Meanwhile, its own engineers were studying the Sovremenny carefully. All 4 ships were upgraded with domestic electronics from 2015 onward, and they remained in service until the Type 052D production line made them redundant. Chapter 3. The Chinese Aegis. From the 052B to the 052DL, the Type 052B, NATO designation Luoyang 1 class, was commissioned in July and November 2004 with just 2 hulls, Guangzhou and Wuhan. It was China's first modern destroyer designed entirely without Western components. The air defense system used Russian Shtil-1 medium-range surface-to-air missiles, the same naval version of the Buk that Russia operated on its own ships. Not a Chinese system, but a Russian one that China understood and could maintain. The 052B was another stepping stone, another deliberate iteration in a long development sequence. The 052B was immediately succeeded by something far more significant. The Type 052C, NATO designation Luoyang 2 class, first commissioned in September 2005. 6 hulls in total. This was the ship where China broke out of the dependency cycle. The 052C carried a domestically developed phased array radar and 48 vertical launch cells loaded with the HQ-9 long-range surface-to-air missile. Range out to 200 kilometers. The Chinese press called it the Chinese Aegis. That comparison was not entirely accurate, but the intent was right. For the first time, a Chinese-built destroyer with a Chinese radar and Chinese missiles could provide area air defense for a fleet. No Russian fire control, no foreign SAM, no borrowed system at the heart of it. 6 hulls before moving on. China treated the entire class as a proof of concept rather than a production platform. The 052C demonstrated that the technology worked. Then engineers refined it, enlarged it, and delivered the Type 052D. The Type 052D, NATO designation Luoyang 3 class, entered service with its lead ship Kunming on March 16, 2014. It doubled the VLS capacity to 64 cells and moved from the 052C's revolver-type launcher to a canister-type system compatible with surface-to-air, anti-ship, land attack, and anti-submarine missiles from the same silo. The new Type 346A dual-band AESA radar replaced the earlier phased array system. The main gun was upgraded from 100 to 130 millimeters. Western analysts compared it directly to the American Arleigh Burke. China was producing it at nearly double the rate the U.S. was building Arleigh Burkes. Production ran across 2 simultaneous lines: Jiangnan Shipyard in Shanghai and Dalian Shipbuilding in the north. 7 Type 052D hulls were commissioned in 2025 alone. The final unit of that batch introduced a rotating AESA radar on the main mast, a quiet but meaningful upgrade over earlier hulls in the same class. By early 2026, total Type 052D production had reached approximately 30 ships, with further hulls still under construction. Among those later hulls was the Type 052DL. Not an official designation, but an informal one used by analysts to describe an extended variant with a flight deck lengthened by 4 meters, specifically to accommodate the Harbin Z-20 naval helicopter, a more capable ASW platform than the Z-9 the earlier hulls carried. The first 052DL, Zibo, was commissioned in 2020. The extended deck is a small change that had a real operational effect. The Z-20 can dip sonar, deploy sonobuoys, and carry heavyweight torpedoes in a way the Z-9 could not. The 052DL is not a new class. It is a mature class getting better while still in production. Chapter 4. The ship America calls a cruiser, the Type 055 Renhai. Every country that builds warships eventually produces one that causes classification arguments. China's is the Type 055. Beijing calls it a destroyer. The United States Navy calls it a cruiser. The disagreement is genuine because the Type 055 Renhai class is a 13,000-ton warship carrying 112 vertical launch cells, a dual-band radar system comparable in concept to the system fitted only on American Gerald R. Ford-class carriers, and a weapons loadout that exceeds anything the U.S. Navy fields in a surface combatant short of a nuclear carrier. The lead ship, Nanchang, was constructed in 29 months at Jiangnan Shipyard at an estimated cost of $852 million. American shipyards are currently taking between 7 and 9 years per Arleigh Burke destroyer. The first 8 Type 055 hulls were commissioned between 2020 and 2022. A confirmed second batch of 6 hulls brought the class to at least 14 ships by 2025. Each Type 055 can carry HQ-9B long-range surface-to-air missiles with 200-kilometer range, YJ-18A anti-ship missiles, and as of December 2025, the YJ-20 hypersonic anti-ship missile, with a reported range exceeding 500 kilometers and a hypersonic terminal phase that current American intercept systems have not been publicly confirmed to defeat. The 112-cell magazine means a single Type 055 carries more VLS capacity than any destroyer or cruiser in the United States Navy inventory. The entire first batch of 8 ships combined carries more vertical launch capacity than the entire Royal Navy surface fleet. On April 23, 2021, China commissioned a Type 055, a Type 075 amphibious assault ship, and a nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine simultaneously in a single ceremony attended by Xi Jinping. Over 70,000 tons of warship in one afternoon. The date was chosen deliberately. It was the 72nd anniversary of the founding of the plan. The Type 055 has also begun operating in ways that confirm its blue water intent. In late 2025, the Type 055 Zunyi was observed participating in a task force that conducted operations in waters near Australia, a deployment range and posture that would have been inconceivable for any previous Chinese surface combatant. The cruiser that Beijing calls a destroyer is now operating as a global power projection platform. Chapter 5. The First Carrier, Liaoning, Shandong, and the Learning Decades. In 1998, China purchased the unfinished Soviet carrier Varyag from Ukraine for $20 million. The official cover story was that it would become a floating casino in Macau. Nobody believed it. The Varyag had been sitting at the Nikolaev shipyard in Ukraine since the Soviet collapse, stripped of its engines, its combat systems, and most of its internal equipment. Getting it to China required navigating the Turkish Straits, a journey that took months of diplomatic negotiation, because Turkey initially refused to allow an unfinished warship without engines or steering through the Bosphorus. China spent over a decade and an estimated $2 billion restoring and reconfiguring the hull at Dalian Shipbuilding. On September 25, 2012, it was commissioned as the Liaoning, hull number 16, China's first aircraft carrier. The political significance was enormous. The actual military capability was limited. The Liaoning uses a ski jump ramp rather than catapults, which restricts it to the J-15 Flying Shark carrier fighter, itself an unlicensed reverse-engineered copy of the Russian Su-33 obtained through a convoluted acquisition of a Ukrainian prototype. The ski jump limits maximum aircraft weight at launch, caps sortie rates, and prevents the operation of fixed-wing airborne early warning aircraft. The Liaoning cannot carry the kind of air wing that makes an American carrier strike group so lethal at extended range. What the Liaoning did provide was something equally important: 13 years of carrier aviation practice. Every Chinese carrier pilot flying today learned the basics on the Liaoning. The doctrines, the procedures, the institutional knowledge required to operate a carrier air wing were developed aboard this ship. It is now classified primarily as a training carrier, its legacy less the ship itself and more the generation of aviators and officers it produced. In 2024, the Liaoning and its successor operated together as two carrier strike groups in the South China Sea for the first time. The successor was the Shandong. The Shandong, hull number 17, commissioned December 17, 2019, was the first aircraft carrier designed and built entirely in China. Not a refitted Soviet hull, but a clean-sheet Chinese design, produced at Dalian Shipbuilding. At approximately 65,000 tons fully loaded, it is larger than the Liaoning. It carries the same ski jump configuration and the same J-15 air wing limitation. It is, in essence, a larger and more refined version of the same concept, a deliberate iteration rather than a generational break. China built the Shandong to consolidate and operationalize what the Liaoning had demonstrated was possible. In 2025, the Shandong conducted its first deployment beyond the second island chain into the Western Pacific, the first time any Chinese carrier had operated that far from the Chinese mainland. The deployment was noted, tracked, and assessed by every regional navy in the Indo-Pacific. The ski jump carrier that had once been described as a training asset was now projecting Chinese naval power into waters that American planners had historically treated as their operational domain. Chapter 6: The Catapult Revolution, the Fujian and what comes after. The Fujian is the first aircraft carrier outside the United States to feature an electromagnetic aircraft launch system, not a steam catapult. Electromagnetic, the same technology used only on the American Gerald R. Ford class. China did not build up to this incrementally by fitting steam catapults first and then upgrading. It skipped steam entirely. The Fujian, hull number 18, was launched at Jiangnan Shipyard in June 2022 and commissioned on November 5, 2025, at Yulin Naval Base on Hainan Island. At over 80,000 tons, the Fujian is the largest warship ever built in Asia. It is the first Chinese carrier capable of launching the J-35 fifth-generation stealth fighter. It is the first capable of supporting the KJ-600, a twin-turboprop airborne early warning aircraft that gives the strike group a radar picture extending hundreds of kilometers in every direction. The kind of situational awareness that transforms a carrier from an airfield at sea into a networked command node. The two previous Chinese carriers could not carry the KJ-600 because fixed-wing AEW aircraft require catapult assistance to get airborne from a flight deck. Before commissioning, the Fujian conducted flight operations with 3 aircraft simultaneously. The J-35, the J-15T, which is a catapult-configured variant of the J-15 with strengthened landing gear and a modified nose-tow attachment point, and the KJ-600. A full carrier air wing that the Liaoning and Shandong could not replicate. The electromagnetic catapult enables higher sortie rates, heavier payloads, and a more flexible air wing composition. The gap between Chinese and American carrier aviation, which had been measured in decades as recently as 2015, was now being measured in years. Western naval analysts noted that the Fujian's journey from first sea trial in May 2024 to commissioning in November 2025, 18 months, was faster than the equivalent timeline for the Gerald R. Ford, despite electromagnetic catapults being entirely new technology for Chinese naval engineers. The commissioning ceremony placed Shandong and a Type 075 amphibious ship visible in the background, a deliberate composition. China had become the world's second-largest carrier operator, and it wanted the image to say so clearly. The 4th carrier is already under construction. Satellite imagery confirmed keel-laying activity at Dalian Shipbuilding in September 2025, and images from February 2026 showed what analysts assessed as 2 armored reactor compartments inside the hull, consistent with nuclear marine propulsion. This is the Type 004. Projected displacement is between 110,000 and 120,000 tons, 10 to 20% larger than the American Gerald R. Ford. It would carry more than 90 fixed-wing aircraft, including J-35 stealth fighters, KJ-600 airborne early warning platforms, and potentially unmanned combat aircraft. Nuclear propulsion means unlimited range, no refueling stops, no endurance constraints. In December 2025, the Pentagon's annual China Military Power Report stated that China was planning to construct 6 Type 004 carriers by 2035. That would give China 9 carriers total. The U.S. Pacific Fleet currently deploys 6. The arithmetic is straightforward, and the implications are not comfortable. Chapter 7. What the numbers say, and what they do not. In 1971, China had 17 Luda-class destroyers, a steam-powered gun-armed surface fleet that could not defend itself against aircraft and could not find submarines it was supposed to hunt. By 2025, the plan operated nearly 40 Type 052D and 052DL destroyers, 14 Type 055 cruisers, and 3 aircraft carriers. Every one of them domestically designed, domestically built, and armed with domestically developed missiles. The progression, from Luda to Luhu, to the dead-end experiments of the Luhai and Luzhou, through the Russian shortcut of the Sovremenny purchase, through the iterative 052B to 052C to 052D development cycle, through the Type 055 and finally to the Fujian, is not a story of gradual improvement. It is a forced march driven by embargo, political catastrophe, and the systematic absorption of every technology China could copy, buy, or build on its own. The plan now operates more commissioned warships than the United States Navy, more than 370 against approximately 292. About 70% of those Chinese warships were launched after 2010. The Office of Naval Intelligence projects China will have 475 battle force ships by 2035. The United States is projected to have between 305 and 317. Chinese shipbuilding capacity is estimated at over 232 times greater annual tonnage output than American yards. A single country that launched wooden junks at Hainan Island in 1949 has built the largest navy on Earth, by hull count, in less than 3 human generations. The numbers are real, and they are striking. But numbers alone do not tell the complete story. The plan has more ships. The U.S. Navy still has more displacement tonnage, more experience operating carrier strike groups at global range, more decades of blue water doctrine, and a network of allied navies that China does not have. The gap in submarine quieting technology remains significant. The integration between sensors, weapons, and command systems, what the U.S. Navy has spent 50 years developing, takes time to build even with excellent hardware. What is beyond dispute is the trajectory. The Type 055 did not exist in 2015. The Fujian did not exist in 2020. The Type 004 was not under construction in 2024. The pace of development in Chinese naval construction has no parallel in the post-Cold War world, and there is no current evidence that it is slowing. The Navy that began with defected nationalist gunboats and Soviet hand-me-downs has become something that every maritime power on Earth is now watching very carefully. And the next chapter, nuclear carriers, hypersonic missiles at fleet scale, and an amphibious force built around the specific operational problem of Taiwan, has already begun.